الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على الحسين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الذين سبقت لهم منا الحسنى أولئك عنها مبعدون. لا يسمعون حسيسها وهم فيما اشتهت أنفسهم خالدون. إن الذين سبقت لهم منا الحسنى أولئك عنها مبعدون. لا يسمعون حسيسها وهم فيما اشتهت أنفسهم خالدون. لا يحزنهم الفزع الأكبر وتتلقاهم الملائكة هذا يومكم وتتلقاهم الملائكة هذا يومكم الذي كنتم توعدون. لا يحزنهم الفزع الأكبر وتتلقاهم تلقاهم الملائكة هذا يومكم الذي كنتم توعدون. يوم نطوي السماء كطي السجل للكتب كما بدأنا أول خلق نعيده وعدا علينا إنا كنا فاعلين. ولقد كتبنا في الزبور من بعد الذكر أن الأرض يرثها عبادي الصالحون. إن في هذا لبلاغا لقوم عابدين. ولقد كتبنا في الزبور من بعد الذكر أن الأرض يرثها عبادي الصالحون. إن في هذا لبلاغا لقوم عابدين. وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين. قل إنما يوحى إلي أنما إلهكم إله واحد فهل أنتم مسلمون؟ فإن تولوا فقل آذنتكم على سواء وإن أدري أقريب أم بعيد ما توعدون إنه يعلم الجهر من القول ويعلم ما تكتمون وإن أدري لعله فتنة لكم ومتاع إلى حين قال رب احكم بالحق وربنا الرحمن المستعان على ما تصفون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Um, Mute your volume real quick. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Raza. I will be moderating today's Majlis. And before we get started, I would like to walk through the agenda. So we will begin with Maryam Zaidi. We'll be reciting the Hadith Qissa, followed by a salam that will be recited by my uncle Ali Zaidi from Boston. Then we will have a topic introduction that I will be giving. And we will then segue into Sheikh Sulayman's speech, followed by a Noha that will be recited by Nasser Rizvi uncle. And finally, we will end off with a Q&A session. So I would like to begin by giving the floor over to Maryam Zaidi, and she will now be reciting the Hadith Qissa.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Maryam Zaidi. Today I will be reciting the English translation of the Hadith Qissa. Before I begin, I would like to request everyone to recite aloud Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala sallam.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. O Allah, send your blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. In the name of Allah, the All-Beneficent and the All-Merciful. Fatima Zahra, the daughter of the Prophet, peace be upon them, is to have thus related an event. My father, the Prophet of Allah, came to my house one day and said to me, "Peace be on you, Fatima." I replied, "And upon you be peace." Then he said, "I feel weakness in my body." I said, "May Allah protect you from weakness, father." He said, "Fatima, please bring the Yemeni cloak and cover me with it." So I brought the Yemeni cloak and covered him with it. Then I looked at him and saw that his face was shining, like a full moon with all its glory and splendor. After a while, my son Hassan came in and said, "Peace be on you, mother." And I replied, "And upon you be peace, O light of my eyes and delight of my heart." He then said, "O mother, I smell a fragrance so sweet and so pure as that of my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "Yes, your grandfather is underneath the cloak." Hassan went near the cloak and said, "Peace be on you, my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you be peace, my son and the master of my fountain, Kauthar. You are given the permission to enter." So Hassan entered the cloak with him. After a while, my Hussein came in and said, "Peace be on you, mother." And I replied, "And upon you be peace, O light of my eyes and the delight of my heart." He then said, "O mother, I smell a fragrance so sweet and so pure as that of my grandfather, the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "Yes, Your grandfather and your brother are underneath the cloak." Hussein stepped forward towards the cloak and said, "Peace be on you, my grandfather, the chosen of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you be peace, my son and interceder of my followers. You are given the permission to enter." So Hussein entered the cloak with them. After a while, Abul Hassan, Ali ibn Abi Talib, came in and said, "Peace be on you, O daughter of the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "And upon you be peace, O father of Hassan and the commander of the faithful." He then said, "O Fatima, I smell a fragrance so sweet and so pure as that of my brother and my cousin, the Prophet of Allah." I replied, "Yes, he is underneath the cloak with your two sons." So Ali went near the cloak and said, "Peace be on you, Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you be peace, my brother, my successor, and my standard bearer. You are given the permission to enter." So Ali entered the cloak with them. Then I stepped forward and I said, "Peace be on you, my father, O Prophet of Allah. May I enter the cloak with you?" He replied, "And upon you be peace, my daughter, O part of myself. You are given the permission to enter." So I entered the cloak with them. Getting together underneath the cloak, my father, the Prophet of Allah, held the two ends of the cloak and raised his right hand towards the heaven and prayed, "O Allah, these are the people of my household Ahlul Bayt. They are my confidants and my supporters. Their flesh is my flesh, and their blood is my blood. Whoever hurts them, hurts me too. Whoever displeases them, displeases me too. I am at war with those who are at war with them. I am at peace with those who are at peace with them. I am the enemy of their enemies, and I am the friend of their friends. They are from me, and I am from them. O Allah, bestow your blessings, benevolence, forgiveness, and your pleasure upon me and upon them, and keep them away from impurity and flaws, and keep them thoroughly purified." Then the Lord Almighty Allah said, "O my angels, O residents of my heavens, verily I have not created the erected sky, the stretched earth, the illuminated moon, the bright sun, the rotating planets, the flowing seas, and the sailing ships, but for the love of these five underneath the cloak." Gabriel, the trusted angel, asked, "Who are under the cloak?" The Almighty answered, "They are the household of the Prophet and the assets of the prophethood. They are Fatima, her father, her husband, and her two sons." Gabriel said, "O Lord, may I fly to earth to be the sixth of them?" Allah replied, "Yes, you are given the permission." Gabriel, the trusted, landed near them and said, "Peace be on you, O Prophet of Allah." And the All-Highest conveys his peace on you and his greetings, and says, "By my honor and glory, O my angels, O residents of my heavens, verily I have not created the erected sky, the stretched earth, the illuminated moon, the bright sun, the rotating planets, the flowing seas and the sailing ships, but for your sake and love. And Allah has given me permission to enter the cloak with you. May I join you, O Prophet of Allah?" The Prophet replied, "And peace be on you, O trusted bearer of Allah's revelations. You are granted the permission." So Gabriel entered the cloak with us and said to my father, "Allah sends his revelations to you. Verily, Allah's desire is to keep you away from impurity and flaws, O people of household Ahlul Bayt, and keep you thoroughly purified." Then Ali said to my father, "O Prophet of Allah, tell me, what significance has Allah given for getting together underneath the cloak?" The Prophet replied, "By him who rightfully appointed me a prophet and chose me a messenger for the salvation of mankind. Whenever and wherever an assembly of our followers and friends mention this event, Allah will bestow on them his blessings and mercy. Angels will encircle them, asking Allah the remission of their sins until the assembly disperses." So Ali said, "Verily, by the Lord of Kaaba, We and our followers are the winners. Then my father replied, by him who rightfully appointed me a prophet, and chose me a messenger for the salvation of mankind. Whenever and wherever an assembly of our followers and friends mentions this event, there shall remain none grieved, but Allah will remove his grief. There shall remain none distressed, but Allah will dispel his distress. There shall remain none wish seeker, but Allah will grant his wish. Ali, peace be upon him, said, then, we have won and attained pleasure. I swear it by Allah, and so have our adherents. They have won and attained pleasure in this world and in the hereafter. I swear it by the Lord of the Kaaba. O Allah, send your blessings on Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Salawat.
Next, we will have my uncle, Ali Zaidi from Boston, who will be reciting a salam.
Thank you, Raza. And thank you, Mariam, for that beautiful recitation of the Hadith Qasa in English. I'm going to be reciting a famous marsiya, which is often recited after the 10th day of Muharram in India and Pakistan. It's in Urdu, but for the benefit of those who don't understand, I thought I'd briefly explain that it's the poet actually talks about our fourth Imam, Imam Zain al-Abidin, and what he must have witnessed going back from Karbala to Damascus, and in particular seeing the women of the family of the Prophet be without hijab and parda, and being in the court of Yazid, and how difficult that must have been. With that, I'll start with salawat for Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا، یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا، اسیر ہو کہ وہ جب شام میں گیا ہوگا، سنا ہے شام میں جاتے ہی خون رونے لگا، سنا ہے شام میں جاتے ہی خون رونے لگا، نہ جانے شمر نے عابد سے کیا کہا ہوگا، یہ سوچتا ہوں، گلے کے توق نے عابد کو کیا جھکانا تھا، گلے کے توق نے عابد کو کیا جھکانا تھا، وہ اپنے کھوئے ہوئے لال ڈھونڈتا ہوگا، یہ سوچتا ہوں، وہ ظلم دیکھیں سجاد نے حسین کے بعد، وہ ظلم دیکھیں سجاد सज्जाद ने हुसैन के बाद मुझे यकीन है कि वो अब तक भी रो रहा होगा। ये सोचता हूँ कि आबिद का हाल क्या होगा, असीर हो के वो जब शाम में गया होगा। सलवात अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आले मुहम्मद।
Great recitation, Ali Chachu. I will now begin a very brief topic introduction prior to Sheikh Sulayman taking over. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Raza, and today we will be discussing whether religion is a benefit or a liability for the human race. This is going to be a 5th lecture in a 7-part series. This topic has become increasingly relevant in contemporary society due to the polarization caused by different religious beliefs and an increase in popularity of atheism in many countries around the world. When most people think about religion, they tend to refer to its traditional components, yet fail to recognize its positive impacts on society. Religion has provided a moral foundation for societies around the world. Atheists may argue, however, that humans have an innate moral code that can be developed without religious influence. This fails to take into account the historical significance of religion in developing many legal and ethical norms around the world today. However, religion has not always been a tool for unifying moral, legal, and ethical codes for society. Interreligious and intra-religious conflicts have also led to the destruction of many societies through war. For example, the Crusades between 1096 and 1291 led to the loss of many lives over control of holy sites between Christians and Muslims. This struggle for control over holy sites continues today and can be seen with the geopolitical tensions between Muslims, Jews, and Christians for control over Masjid al-Aqsa. Religious violence has continued till today, from Islamic extremists waging global jihad and power struggles between Sunni and Shia Muslims in the Middle East to the persecution of Rohingya in Myanmar and outbreaks of violence between Christians and Muslims across Africa. Let's consider the very recent incident of the teacher in France who was beheaded for sharing controversial depictions of Prophet Muhammad with his students. This specific example to some is representative of a much greater problem. When do religious followers draw the line when it comes to others knowingly or unknowingly disrespecting their beliefs? Also, there are some differing opinions on whether or not religion is a waste of resources. Many believe that money given to build and maintain religious buildings and monuments, support religious leaders, and fill these buildings with religious artifacts is going to waste. Why not use those funds to create universities or assist the impoverished? These questions to us seem obvious, but from a secular perspective, they make sense. Oftentimes, we get caught up in our own confirmation biases, and we fail to acknowledge the opinions that contradict our own. Discussing topics that force us to question what we believe and why we believe in it leads to an increase in our own faith. To expand on this topic and offer a much more in-depth synopsis of this issue, I would like to move on to introducing our next speaker, Maulana Sayyid Sulayman Hassan. He is currently leading the Shahe Najaf Center in Northern Virginia, and he will be giving the speech on if religion is a benefit or a liability for the human race.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين فاطر السماوات والأرضين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الدين عند الله الإسلام اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you, Reza, and to all of those who recited for setting the stage for the topic that we are going to discuss today. Inshallah, there will be a brief majlis, and during that time, I'd like to set the general parameters of how we as Muslims should approach the question of whether religious belief is a net benefit to humanity or a net harm. And I'm presupposing that we are Muslims and we believe in God. Of course, that's a valid question. And somebody who does not believe in God might approach this question in a very different way. But that question is a separate issue. Should we believe in God? Why do we believe in God? Assuming that we are Muslims, then the question is, how do we approach other people who might say that religious belief is harmful or that it is a waste of time for humanity? And so part of that is a response and a defense of religious belief and the religion of Islam. And it is going to be related to the question of why we believe in God, but not the exact same thing as a discussion of belief in God in the first place. Inshallah, I will try to leave a little bit more time for the discussion because I imagine this question will raise many interesting points and that discussion will be very valuable. But let's begin by looking at a verse of Quran, Inna ad-deena 'inda Allahi al-Islam. The deen in the eyes of Allah is only Islam. Now, many times people translate this very common and very well-known verse, and they say that the only religion in the eyes of Allah is Islam. And that's not a very good translation for us to use for two reasons. One is the word deen shouldn't be translated religion without a little bit of explanation. And Islam also shouldn't be translated as Islam with a capital I, the religion that you and I know of and subscribe to, the religion of Islam. Deen literally is more than simply a religion and more than even a way of life, but it is an orientation and a system of law and obedience. It is, in some sense, the reality of our existence and our submission and obedience to reality. When we say Maliki Yawmiddin in Surah Al-Fatiha, we're not saying that Allah is the master of the day of religion. We're saying that Allah is the master, the king of Yawmuddin, the day of judgment. And judgment in our Islamic belief is not a court where Allah is going to either reward us or punish us for something that we did in the past. Judgment in our Islamic conception is really the removing of the curtain from the deeper nature of reality. So, for example, when the good doers are rewarded in paradise, that's simply because they were always living in paradise. Their good deeds are fragrant and blessed and beautiful and good. But we don't appreciate that in this world. And sometimes we see people who are doers of good And we think they're simple-minded or they're foolish because we don't see the beauty. We don't see the reality of their good deeds. The Day of Judgment is simply reality becoming clear to us. This was beautiful and good. And evildoers, they're living in hell in this world. Sometimes they may have anxiety. Sometimes they may feel like life has no purpose or no meaning. And that feeling of anxiety or anger or meaninglessness, that's just one aspect of the evil of their life choices, the harm of their life choices. But in reality, the punishment of the hereafter is simply the removal of the curtain. You think that you're living a good life by giving in to temptation, by following your low desires, but I'm just fooling myself. I'm injured. I'm suffering, and then I've taken a painkiller. I don't feel the pain of my injury, but the infection, the blood loss, the wound is real. The Day of Judgment is not that Allah is going to punish me. He's not going to wound me by putting me in hell. But rather, Allah is simply going to remove that numbing agent so that I can see and confront the reality of my own existence and my choices. So if the Day of Judgment is the day of reality and the uncovering of reality, then deen, in one sense, is just reality. And your following and submitting to reality is your religiosity. That's your deen. And therefore, Islam needs to be understood not as a label. I'm a Muslim, so-and-so is a Christian, that person is a Hindu, this person is a member of no religion. Islam is simply the expression of your submission to the truth, so that my humility and my acknowledgement of what is real and what is true is my deen, my response to truth. So, inna ad-deena inda Allah al-Islam is not that out of all of these different religions that exist, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen one label, one brand, one identity for us and said this is the best brand of religion. No. Out of all of the possible orientations towards existence and towards truth, to submit before the truth, to acknowledge the truth, that is the only way, the only path that Allah has for us. So that's the framing of us as Muslims understanding what is religion and what is Islam. It's not an identity or a label. It's not even, as we sometimes say, a way of life. It's an approach. And the approach is that we look for truth, and then when we discover truth, we acknowledge it, we submit it, and we obey to it. We submit to it and we obey it. That truth can be truth in the physical world. There are laws that govern our existence. If I don't eat, I'm going to get hungry. And if I don't eat well, I'm going to get sick. And if I overeat, I'm going to get sick. So to acknowledge that that is true, and then to live my life in such a way that I don't undernourish myself and I don't damage my health by overeating, that is Islam. Because to acknowledge what is true and then to orient my life around the truth, that is the essence and the nature of Islam. And that is one reason why one of the names of Islam is Dinul Fitra, the religion of our human nature. Because the goal of the teachings of the Quran, the teachings of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt ﷺ is to put us in touch with our nature. Some things that people used to know in their early human existence, in their primitive societies before distractions and various cultures covered up basic realities. And then there are other things that are part of our human nature, but because of our ignorance, because of our lack of experience, because of our lack of initiation, we can't understand them, we can't grasp them unless somebody tells us. And so a prophet, a scripture, it brings us up to speed. But what it's telling us, what it's bringing us up to speed about, is something that is within our very nature. So I give this introduction because when we as Muslims talk about religion, when we talk about the value of religion and the benefit of religion, we're not talking about religion as simply an identity or a brand or a theology or a set of practices or even a way of life. We're talking about Islam at its essence, which is to recognize truth and to submit to truth. And truth exists on different levels. There are physical truths that you and I can understand by observation and experimentation. And then there are spiritual truths. Some of those spiritual truths you and I also are able to perceive directly through our intellect. And other spiritual truths we can only come to know if we have guidance from a source that is connected to Allah, from a ma'soom, from somebody who has true knowledge, infallible knowledge. But whether it be the type of knowledge that you and I can get directly through our intellect, through our observation, through our experience, or it be the type of knowledge that you and I can't get directly, and we need a divine source, a divinely guided source in order to understand. In both cases, that which you and I know directly and that which we can only know through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a guide given to us by Allah. In both cases, the goal is truth. And to know what is true and to submit to what is true is the essence of Islam. So when we speak about religion, or we speak about the value of religion, that's what we're talking about. If somebody has a different definition of religion, that's kind of like my loyalty to a sports team, or my loyalty to some kind of material identity group, then that's not what we as Muslims consider to be the meaning and the essence of religion. Now, is religion, in this meaning that I've spoken of, a net benefit or a net harm? Well, the way that we as Muslims believe in the essence of religion, it goes without saying that it's going to be a net benefit. Because how can recognizing truth and following what is true not be a benefit to society? How can it not be a benefit to the individual? The question really is, what is it that is true? Is the existence of a creator, God, true? Is the belief in prophets, the belief in the laws revealed by God, are the obligations that Muslims or members of another religious community follow, are they true or are they not true? The question then becomes, what is true? And what is it that we should follow? But at origin, humility before the truth, submission to the truth, whether the truth be a physical truth that our senses have access to, or a spiritual truth that our soul needs to understand, that is, of course, going to be a benefit. And not just a benefit, but a basic requirement of our humanity and our spiritual growth. In fact, even our material growth. So let's not really focus on the question of whether religion in that sense is a benefit or not. The answer is very easy. If religion is submission to the truth, then it is a benefit and it is a necessity. And the only question is, what is this truth? What are the spiritual benefits or the spiritual teachings that we should agree to or we should submit to? And let's frame the question in a little bit of a different manner so that we can try to explore a few of the common objections that people have. And that framing is as follows. When people live their life with a religious affiliation, religious practice, they live their lives in a certain way. And when they don't have a religious affiliation, and for example, they say that I am committed to science, I am committed to humanism, they live their lives in a different way. And the question is the religious orientation beneficial or harmful to humanity in comparison with a non-religious orientation, whether it be scientific or whether it be humanist or secular, in whatever way a person might define it? Is the religious orientation beneficial? Now, it's a little bit difficult to answer that question. The framing is a little bit easier for us to approach because the answer is not obvious. But it's difficult to answer that question. Some of you may have heard that atheists sometimes say that there's really not that much of a difference between an atheist and a theist, because every theist rejects hundreds and thousands of gods. If I believe in one God, the Christian, Jewish, Muslim God, then I reject the gods of all pagans. I reject the idols that pagans worship. I reject the sun, the moon, the stars, and all of those human beings that other people may worship, may consider to be gods. I reject Zeus and Thor and the whole pantheon of Rome and Greece and the Vikings and Germanic tribes and India and so on. And so some atheists say that, well, as an atheist, the only thing that I'm doing is I'm rejecting your God. You reject millions of gods that other people believe in, and I'm just rejecting your God. And therefore, there's really not that much difference between the atheist and the theist. They're all rejecting a bunch of gods. It's just that the theist rejects, especially the believer in one God, rejects, say, X number of gods, and the atheist rejects X plus one number of gods. Some of you may have heard that argument. And this is based on a fundamental misunderstanding that the basic distinction between a theist and an atheist is how many gods you believe in or you reject. And a similar kind of a point can be made about talking about a religious point of view or a non-religious point of view. Just as a theist does not consider himself or herself bound by what did the pagans believe in Viking lands and what did the pagans believe in ancient or in present day India. Similarly, we are not talking about the totality of religious practices and beliefs that people may have. That's not our concern. In reality, the difference between a theist and an atheist is the belief that there is purpose and meaning and a spiritual reality beyond the material existence. And then how we understand that purpose, that meaning, that spiritual reality, whether it be one God or whether it be many gods, that is a second question. So the difference between an atheist and a theist is not that the theist rejects a bunch of gods that other people believe in, and the atheist rejects a bunch of gods that other people believe in, plus one, the God that the theist believes in. The difference is really a difference of whether there is an origin to life, to existence, that we can call divine, or there isn't a divine origin to life. I'm simplifying, but if we understand that this is the real difference between theism and atheism when it comes to the question of the religious impulse and the non-religious idea of life, then we're not talking about all of those specific religious ideas that people have that may include holy war that may include killing people or fighting people who refuse to accept the religion. That's really not what we're talking about. That's like talking about the specific gods that followers of different religions may believe in, or the specific idols that they may worship. What we're talking about is the belief that there is a transcendent origin to our existence. Is it good for humanity to have that belief, or is it not good for humanity to have that belief? The specifics are a later question. And as Muslims, we very much agree that the way that many people are religious is very wrong. The way that many non-Muslims are religious is very wrong. And the way that many Muslims are religious is very wrong. And there is a very beautiful message that we have in Quran. And this is one of those messages that gives us a great deal of humility. I believe it's in Surah An-Nisa. لَيْسَ بِأَمَانِيِّكُمْ وَلَا أَمَانِيِّ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. This is Allah speaking to the believers that it's not how you wish, it's not how the people of the book wish. You wish and they wish that Allah is going to give you a shortcut, a free pass to eternal reward and to paradise. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for you Muslims, and it's not going to happen for the people of the book. God does not have a special relationship with anyone. He is the creator, the Lord, the sustainer of everyone. In fact, of all that exists, even beyond humanity. So the verse that says it's not what you wish, nor what the people of the book wish, is telling us that our prejudice and the way that we approach religion and the expectations that we have of religion are often wrong. And what is that wrong expectation? The Quran explains, مَنْ يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. That if you do evil, you're going to be punished for that evil. In other words, I might wish that religion gives me an excuse not to have to follow my conscience, to be able to do evil but not get punished, and then somebody else who does evil, they get punished double because they're the followers of the wrong religion. So the Quran specifically says that the way that many people are religious, Muslim or non-Muslim, is wrong. But the question is not, is this religious practice right or wrong? Is this religious belief right or wrong? First, let's ask the question, what about the religious orientation as a whole? And here we find two problems. One, it's impossible to measure. I can say that there were religious wars, in the pre-Enlightenment period in Europe, in particular before the Treaty of Westphalia. There were many religious wars that took place between Catholics and Protestants, and even between different countries that may follow the same denomination of Christianity. Those religiously motivated wars, of course, were often fought in the name of religion, but was it really religion that was motivating them? Or was it class differences? Was it economic factors, political factors, ethnic factors that show up in the form of religion? And this is because when people fight, they often draw on those sources of strength that allow them to be able to marshal their resources and marshal their allies. But when they draw on those resources, that doesn't mean that this is the cause of the conflict. And it doesn't mean that if they didn't have religion, there wouldn't be conflict. There might still be conflict. There might be worse conflict. There might be lesser conflict, but it's impossible for us to measure whether what claims to be a religious war or what is perceived to be a religious war was actually caused by religion in the first place. So the first problem that we have is that it's impossible for us to measure. How are you going to go, especially in history, but even in the present time, and say, for example, the civil war in Lebanon, this Iran-Iraq war, the war in Syria, how are you going to say what percentage of this was political? What percentage of this was urban versus rural, or urbanized versus tribal and Bedouin? What percentage of this was a geopolitical struggle among regional and international powers? What percentage of it was a religious war or a sectarian war? It's impossible to measure. And if something is impossible for us to measure, then there might be a right answer. But the very fact that it's impossible for us to measure accurately should tell us that maybe that's not the best use of our time, unless we can measure it accurately. Let's say, for example, that I'm trying to cook something and I need to measure the ingredients, and it makes a difference whether I'm putting, say, 5 ounces of flour or 6 ounces of flour in my recipe. But the only scale I have doesn't measure accurately. It's a scale that's designed to weigh, human beings, and it's only accurate to the pound. It's not accurate to the ounce. Now, there is a right answer. How many ounces of flour do you want to put in your recipe? But because you don't have any kind of scale that can measure it accurately, then don't just say, well, I guess I'm going to use this scale. It's going to mess you up. Maybe you need to find another way to measure, or maybe you won't be able to measure it until you find a better scale. So this first problem that we're talking about, it doesn't tell us there's no right answer. That does religion cause harm or doesn't religion cause harm? But it does tell us that, at least with the tools that we currently have, we can't measure that 5 ounces versus 6 ounces of flour. We don't have a way of saying how the religious influence can be separated from these other ethnic, economic, and political and geopolitical influences. And so we have to, at the very least, be careful. If you're using that scale, then be aware it's not accurate. The significant digits are not sufficient to give you a good result. And if it's not just a cake you're cooking, but you're trying to do a scientific experiment, be aware that your measurements are going to be all over the place. So that's the first problem. It's really impossible for us to measure, and therefore we have to be humble. And that's one thing that's missing in this debate. People say religion causes these conflicts. If it weren't for religion, then India would be a land of peace and honey. If it weren't for religion, then Syria would be a land of peace, and so on. We have to be humble when making those determinations. So the first question is that, can we even separate out the benefit or the harm? And at least currently, we as human beings don't have a means. But there is another question, and maybe an even more fundamental problem. And that more fundamental problem is not that we can't measure it effectively, but rather that it isn't fair for us to speak of benefit or harm without focusing on what is right or wrong. And this goes back to the earlier point. When something is right, then you don't ask, is it beneficial or is it harmful? The question of benefit or harm implies that we as human beings are just going to take a utilitarian approach to something. That if I can measure, let's say with a perfect scale that can actually separate economic factors, political factors, and it's a very good scale, patented, just invented, it can measure the religious component. If I can find such a scale, and I find that religion has a benefit, or religion has a harm, then the implication is that if religion is beneficial, if it causes 1 million people to die, but it causes 1,000,001 people to be born, to be saved, then I'll use religion. If religion spends $1 million, but then it produces $1 million plus one, then I will use religion. And that's the wrong framing. The framing should be, is religion right? Is religion wrong? If it's right, then I have to figure out how to be religious in a way that doesn't have those harms, that doesn't cause that loss of 1 million lives, that doesn't cause the loss of resources. So once again, to make it clear what we're talking about. Number one, it's really hard to measure. I would say it's impossible to measure, and therefore we need to be humble. But number two, even if you can have a good scale, even if you have a perfect measure, it's the wrong approach to say, is it beneficial, is it harmful? As if you're choosing investment options. Should I invest in gold, or should I invest in stocks? Should I invest in real estate, or should I invest in corporate bonds? You're not looking at a rate of return. You should be looking for truth, discover truth, and then find out how to honor that truth in a way that is sincere, that is not harmful. Right? If viruses cause disease, then it's irrelevant whether it's beneficial or harmful in a certain way. I have to acknowledge that truth, and then I have to live with that truth in a way that minimizes the harm. It's not a question of, let's see if it's beneficial, if it's harmful, then we'll accept it, or we won't accept it. So that's the proper approach to these questions. But let's try to understand what's actually going on. What's actually going on is that when people say religion is harmful, what they're often doing is they are seeing certain harms in society that come from religion, or that they think come from religion. And they are then trying to solve that harm by saying, if only we didn't have religion, or if only we didn't have so much religion and it was boxed in, then we would be better off. And one of the ways that it's very helpful for us to respond to what's actually going on, right? What's actually going on is not the perspective that I was speaking about earlier, which is, number one, Islam is simply recognizing what's true. In that case, the question doesn't arise. Number two, we don't have a measurement, an instrument to measure. And number three, the approach should be what is right and not what is beneficial or harmful. But if we set aside those principles, the actual objection people have is, look at all this warfare, this death, and this destruction. So let's take a look at that. Now, there's no precise statistics that we have what were the most destructive events in human history, but we have a few general ideas. We can say that World War II caused somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 million, maybe 55 million people to die. World War I caused something in the neighborhood of 20 million people to die. The Mongol invasion and conquest of much of Central Asia and much of Asia caused about 30 million people to die over a few generations. But if World War II caused 50 million people to die, if the Mongol invasion caused 30 million people to die, if World War I caused 20 million people to die, that wasn't religion. None of those events can be described as a religious battle or series of battles. So if we say, what about all the death and destruction that's caused by religion, then we should also be aware and acknowledge that some of the most destructive, human-caused, deliberately human-caused battles, events, were not religious in nature. And if we add, for example, Tamerlane, the American Civil War, and so on, then we have other very momentous and very destructive events that were not primarily religiously motivated. But that doesn't deny the fact that there were religious wars, and there are people who are injured, who are tortured, who are killed in the name of religion. And this is where I want to bring us in conclusion for this initial discussion, which is that from a Muslim perspective, what we say is, first of all, put things in perspective. If you think that religion has caused death, destruction, the prejudice and separation within society, then you're right. There have been times when religion has used for all of those destructive ends, but keep it in perspective. There are times when people have committed equal or greater crimes, more destructive wars under secular labels. Some of the examples that I could give are controversial, and so I deliberately didn't give the example of the Bolshevik Revolution or the Soviet Union or communist China, because I didn't want to get into controversial examples where people debate the cause of the casualties and the number of casualties. But World War I, World War II, the Mongol invasions, I think are relatively straightforward or relatively less controversial examples. So keep the things in perspective. That yes, religion has been used for destructive ends. Religion has been used for constructive ends. There has been destruction and maybe even greater destruction caused through secular or non-religious reasons. And there have been wars and battles that have fought for religion. But what are the benefits of religion? If we say that religion has caused harm and secular causes or movements have caused harm, then why allow for religion? Why not remove at least one type of harm, which is the harm that comes from religious hatred, from prejudice that we are Muslims, they are Hindu, we are Muslims, they are Christian, we are Muslims, they are Jews, or it might be members of two other religions, Hindus and Buddhists, for example, or whatever the case might be. Why not eliminate at least this one level or this one source of division in society? And this is where we do need to also acknowledge the benefits of religion. Because life is not just about our number of people who are alive, the lifespan, the GDP of a particular society. Life, first and foremost, is about purpose and meaning. And if I have a meaningful life, then even if I don't live as long as somebody else, even if I'm not as wealthy as somebody else, even if I can't quantify my existence in as great terms, that life is valuable. And the more meaningful my life is, the more valuable that life is. At least for my own self, the more meaningful my life is, the more valuable it is. And religion gives meaning to individuals and to societies. And again, I'm speaking of religion in general, meaning the religious impulse, and that is something that's difficult to do. But given the imprecision of that generalization, we can all appreciate the fact that a religious identity, a religious affiliation, allows for meaning when we confront sickness, when we confront death. It allows us to frame our life challenges and decisions in a meaningful context. And this gives continuity. This is what allows sophisticated art and civilization and laws to develop. That is also a benefit of religion. And many of the most beautiful architectural, artistic, and cultural artifacts that humanity has today, they are the products of that religious impulse. So again, as I said earlier, the true perspective from a Muslim perspective is not about religion as a general concept or the religious impulse. The true perspective for us is to say what is right. And then if something is right, we honor that truth in a way that is not harmful to us or to others. But if we set aside that consideration of truth and we're just talking about religion and the religious impulse, then yes, we as Muslims should and must acknowledge that there have been times when religion has been used in destructive ways, but there are also many benefits that humanity has obtained from religion. And those two must be taken together. They can't be separated from each other. Final point that I would like to make before we move to the conclusion of this portion of the program is that don't think of our human existence and our religious practice as a zero-sum game. Some people say that religion is a waste. So if I spend an hour worshiping or in a majlis or in the masjid or reading Quran, that's an hour that I'm not doing something constructive. $1 that I give towards a religious cause is $1 that's not going to alleviate hunger, that's not going for scientific progress. And they think of it as a zero-sum game. Remember, human existence is not a zero-sum game. If I, through religion, spending my time, spending my money in a religious goal, become a more sincere person, I become a more humble person, then I very well might decide to volunteer to help other people more. I might decide not to retire early and to continue working so I can support other people. I might decide to spend $1,000 on Hajj or Ziyarat, but that's not a waste, because when I come back, I'm inspired to give many thousands of dollars more worth of my money and my time for the betterment and the upliftment of my society. Secular life does not mean that every hour of your time or every dollar of your charity is going to go towards something that is truly useful. And we find that philanthropy among people who are not religious, it often goes towards things that are of, maybe less importance than alleviating hunger, providing food and shelter and healthcare to the most underprivileged members of society. So don't think of religion as a zero-sum game. That if I spend $1 in religious, or I spend $1 on religion, I spend an hour in a religious activity, then I'm taking away from the poor, or I'm taking away from scientific progress. That religious dedication is something that also motivates me to do so many more meaningful things in my life. And it's not at all a matter of either this or that. And that's the kind of religiosity that we should have. And that brings us to the musibah and the remembrance of Ahlul Bayt. The type of religiosity that you and I hold up as an ideal is a religiosity that makes us humble, that makes us committed to the truth, and that makes us ready to offer ourselves, our lives, and everything that we possess for the sake of the truth. And that is the most valuable resource that a human being can have. If you want to talk about the value of religion, then one very short answer, which doesn't need this whole explanation, is to say Imam Hussein. Can anybody deny that humanity is filled with warfare, with hatred, with injustice, with suffering? And that suffering is often because many people, they can't be bothered to sacrifice their comfort for the sake of others, for the sake of truth. And Imam Hussein is our reminder that problems in humanity can only be solved if those who have the ability are willing to stand up and even sacrifice their comfort and their well-being for the sake of the truth. Imam Hussein stood up on the day of Ashura, and he faced an enemy with thousands of soldiers and weapons and a whole powerful empire and government behind them. And he had with him 72 soldiers some of whom were old and some of whom were young children. And he had himself and his faith. Imam Hussein was not compelled into that battle, but he fought because he wanted to set an example for all of humanity, and in particular for us, his followers, that when there is a cause that is just, there is a cause that is true, give your all to serve it to the best of your ability. And that is why on the day of Ashura, Imam Hussein, at the end of the battle, after all of his companions had already gone and faced the enemy, after even the members of his family had been martyred, and his own beloved son Ali Akbar was now a martyr, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas had been martyred, Imam Hussein, he bid farewell to his family. He went to the tent in which his son Zainul Abidin, who was ill, lay with fever. And he said, "O my son, I go to the battlefield and I entrust to you the leadership of the Muslim Ummah." And Imam Zainul Abidin, when he heard those words of his father, he began to cry. And he tried to lift himself, in spite of his illness, off of the ground. And when Imam Hussein said, where was he going? The Imam Zainul Abidin said that, "O my father, how can it be that the grandson of the Messenger of Allah is alone, and you bid farewell, and I don't try to lay down my own life in defense of you and your message?" Imam said that, "O my son Zainul Abidin, you have a different mission which you must fulfill." Imam bid farewell to Lady Zainab and to the women, to the children, the widows, the orphans in the tent. And then as he began to leave the tent, his daughter Sakina, a young girl, she came out behind her father, and it was as if she said to Imam Hussein that, "O my father, I know that very soon I will be an orphan. And you were known as somebody who showed kindness to orphans." And sometimes it is said that she said to Imam Hussein that, "Because I will not have anyone to console me after you are martyred, O my father, can you show me that kindness that you showed to my cousin, the daughter of Muslim ibn Aqil, when her father was martyred, so I can have the memory of your love and your kindness with me as I go through the dark days of grieving and suffering in the dungeon of Kufa and in the imprisonment of Sham and Damascus." And then after all of these farewells, Imam Hussein went out and he faced the enemy alone. And that is when he made his call, when he said, speaking to people in every land and in every era of history, speaking to each and every one of us, "Is there anyone who will come to our assistance? Is there anyone who will defend the family and the progeny of the Prophet of Islam?" The Imam was not asking for us to come to his physical assistance or to save his life. The Imam was asking for us to come to the assistance of his religion and his message, to stand up for what is true, to dedicate our lives to the betterment of the human family, the upliftment of society in material and in spiritual terms. And if I want to say in just one sentence, is religion a net benefit or a net harm? Then I would say, if it is the religion of Hussein ibn Ali, then there is all benefit and no harm. And if it is the religion of anyone other than Hussein ibn Ali, then I don't want to have anything to do with it. May Allah keep us true to the message and the mission of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam and Imam Hussein. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un.
Thank you so much, Sheikh Sulayman. We will now be moving on to a Noha that will be given by Daniel Rizvi, who will be stepping in for Nasser Rizvi uncle.
हर दुरूद और हर सलाम مادر حسین تیرے نام ہر درود اور ہر سلام مادر حسین تیرے نام زوجہ علی سربلا فاطمہ عظیم ارجمن جس کے آستان پاک کے قدسیان عرش ہے غلام ہر درود اور ہر سلام مادر حسین تیرے نام وہ فاطمہ جس کے لاڈلے حسن حسین جس کی بیٹیا فلک مکان ہر درود اور ہر سلام مادر حسین تیرے نام کٹ رہا تھا فرق شاہدی چل رہا تھا خنجر لائی بی بی آپ دیکھتی رہی لٹ گئے حرم جلے خیام ہر درود اور ہر سلام خواہر حسین تیرے نام ہر درود اور ہر سلام خواہر حسین تیرے نام ثانیہ جناب سیدہ اللہ اللہ تیرا حوصلہ خوب کی حفاظت حرم بعد قتل سید انام ہر درود اور ہر سلام خواہر حسین تیرے نام بی بی غم اٹھائے ہے بہت دل پہ داغ کھائے ہے بہت تجھ پہ حسین کی بہن ہو گئی مصیبت تمام ہر درود اور ہر سلام خواہر حسین تیرے نام دولت بطول لٹ گئی دختر رسول لٹ گئی چھن گئی سروں سے چادریں جل گئے حسین کے خیام ہر درود اور ہر سلام خواہر حسین کا تیرے نام ہر درود اور ہر سلام خواہر حسین تیرے نام میت پری ہے بے کفن کیا کرے حسین کی بہن بے کسی اور ایسی بے کسی شام اور کربلا کی شام ہر درود اور ہر سلام خواہر حسین تیرے نام ہر درود اور ہر سلام مادر حسین تیرے نام
Jazakumullah.
Thank you for that great recitation, Danielle. We will now be moving into the Q&A session. So I will begin by putting the first question into the chat. and asking it at the same time. Okay. So the first question is, should faith groups ally with non-faith groups to advocate compassionate causes? Are there any precedents of such cooperation from the lives of the Ahlul Bayt?
Very good question. And the answer ties into one of the main takeaways I hope we have from this session, which is that as Muslims, we are not there to defend religion as a whole or even Islam as a whole, because many people are Muslims as a label and they have some bigotry or some prejudices within their religiosity. What we are seeking to do is to defend being religious in a way that is true and therefore is by definition a benefit to society, serving what is right, and therefore by the very nature of our humility and our service of what is true, trying to benefit humanity. And that means that yes, of course, we must work very hard to develop alliances with faith groups, meaning people from other religions, or non-faith-based groups, to advocate compassionate causes. And are there precedents? The biggest precedents is from the time of Prophet Muhammad himself. Prophet Muhammad said that Hilful Fudul, a pre-Islamic pledge that was made by some of the people of Quraysh in Mecca, when the Prophet was a young man, he was maybe around 20 or a little bit less. That was a pre-Islamic pledge, not among faith groups, but to prevent people from taking advantage of pilgrims and weak people in society. As after Islam, Prophet Muhammad said that if anybody were to call upon me on the basis of that pledge that was made before Islam and that the Prophet was a party to, I would answer that call even today. And there is a historical report that once Imam Hussein alayhi salam threatened the government of his time that if you do not stop oppressing, then I am going to raise the call of Hilful Fudul, a pre-Islamic pledge. And several members of Medina who were the descendants of the people that were part of that pledge, they said that we were going to answer the call if the Imam does. So yes, there is a precedent. Unfortunately, we as Muslims don't often don't often honor that, and because we don't honor it, the question arises. But yes, we should form those alliances. We have to work very hard to do so. One point I will make, that when it comes to non-faith groups, they will often say that, well, this isn't a religious issue at all. This is a human issue, like the environment, for example, or hunger. It's not a religious issue, it's a human issue. We as Muslims don't agree with that. We believe the environment is a religious issue because God created the world, and we are responsible for the well-being of animals and the well-being of the earth itself, because the earth is a manifestation, an ayah of God. We believe that hunger is a religious issue because God created humanity. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, the Quran says. God has honored humanity, and therefore we are to honor people. It's a religious issue. But it's a religious issue that's not exclusive to one religion. When people say it's not a religious issue, what they often mean is it's not just for Christians or just for Muslims or just for Hindus. This applies to all of humanity. And that's true. It's a common issue, but for Muslims, it's also an intensely spiritual issue. So don't ever form those alliances by saying this is not a religious issue. It is a religious issue, but it's a religious issue where you can and should find common ground with people from different religions or no religion. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you so much for that great answer. The second question is, would you agree that people are dissuaded from faith because it restricts free inquiry and is prone to conflict based on claims of self-righteousness?
Yes, people are dissuaded from faith because of that, and that's one thing that we as Muslims must avoid. The Quran is very clear that that is not a valid religiosity. Allah says in the Quran, فَبَشِّرْ عِبَادِ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ. Cults, some religions, they sometimes try to limit our inquiry. The Quran says something else. Give good tidings to my servants who listen to what people say, meaning they have to be exposed to a variety of opinions. فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَ, and then they follow the best. So they have developed their logic and their thinking, so they're able to evaluate. And then they listen to a variety of opinions, then they follow what is best. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ هَدَاهُمُ اللَّهُ. That's what guidance is. وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. And these are the people who are wise. So the Quran is very clear that we should expose ourselves to different opinions. We should allow different opinions to be present in society, but for the purpose of guidance and for the purpose of for a benefit to humanity, and therefore it's not just a matter of freedom of speech and anybody can say whatever they want. It's a matter of freedom of speech in order to allow people to have inquiry and to then be able to follow what's best. So Islam allows free inquiry in science. It allows the exploration of intellectual, philosophical, theological schools of thought. And in fact, there's a very good example we have when the Quran describes the Prophet's discussion with non-believers. In Surah Saba, the Quran says, قُلْ مَنْ يَرْزُقُكُم مِّنَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. O Prophet, ask people, who is your creator? Who is your sustainer? And then tell them, قُلِ اللَّهِ. So the Prophet is talking here not to Christians and Jews only, but even to people who don't believe in God. And how does the Quran say that you should talk to those people? وَإِنَّا أَوْ إِيَّاكُمْ لَعَلَى هُدًى أَوْ فِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. Allah is telling the Prophet, tell those people who are arguing with you, look, either you or we are either guided or misguided. So that calm, intellectual, respectful tone of discussion, Surah Saba, verse 24, even with people who don't believe in God. So Islam does want us to allow respectful inquiry, and we as Muslims should respect that. Sometimes religious people fall short, sometimes we Muslims fall short, and that's a failure on our part, and it does turn people off to religion.
The next question is, what is the truth in the perception that atheists or agnostics are less violent and more compassionate than people of faith? Does the evidence support this?
There are sometimes studies that say that people, are more charitable, for example, or more philanthropic when they are not religious. And there's a couple problems with these types of studies, and I'm going to be very brief, so it's not going to be a comprehensive answer. But number one, what does it mean to be religious? If somebody is agnostic or even atheist, but they are humble, they are generous, they are respectful of other people, well, those are religious values. I believe in those things as religious values. I, as a Muslim, believe one of the names of God is al-Haq. And so if a person believes in truth, then as I see truth and reality, that person believes in God, even if they consider themselves to be an agnostic, if they believe in justice, if they believe in truth. Because Haq is one of the names of God, one of the attributes of God. So one problem is, what does it mean to be religious? Sometimes, these studies, they make those conclusions based on a very narrow definition of religion and non-religion, or a self-definition of religious or non-religious. But if somebody says that, yeah, I believe in God, I don't pray, I don't fast, but it's really important to me to help the needy, then in my mind, they're very religious. They might not self-describe as very religious. People might not label them as religious, but they are very religious. They're just religious in one way. They're also not religious in another way. And if somebody prays a lot and doesn't do charity, then they're not very religious. They're religious in one way, but they're not religious in another very important way. So that's one part. The other part is, what does it mean to be charitable? What does it mean to be compassionate? If I raise a family, I have kids because I want to honor God, because I want to preserve my culture, my religion. I want to preserve humanity. I want to try to raise good, upstanding members of society. It's a difficult thing. It's a thankless task. But sometimes it's a very noble thing to do for the sake of Allah. And that doesn't count as charity, but it's a charitable act, right? If I give up my dream of a certain career because I want to live close to my parents, because I want to help my family, that might not count as charity. It's not a charitable contribution, but it is an act of charity and nobility. So it's problematic to use those studies and draw conclusions.
Thank you so much for that great answer. The next question is, how do we use our algorithm with a skeptic or an agnostic? If our God is Allah, and then we believe in that, then we have to go to Prophet Muhammad, and then we go to Imam Ali, and then to the 12 Imams. How can we prove that all of these things within the same religion are correct?
So that's a little bit of a related question, but it's not directly about our current topic. I think the best way to approach that is that you go step by step. Obviously, we can't prove, Imam Ali Naqi alayhi salam directly from our intellect. But first, we take belief in God, and then, is Prophet Muhammad, based on what we know of his biography, based on what we know of his revelation, is he a true prophet or not? Is it worth believing in him or rejecting him? And then the question is, what did Prophet Muhammad say? So every step after that is, did Prophet Muhammad say Imam Ali is to be followed? Did Imam Ali say that Imam Hassan is to be followed, and Imam Hassan? May Allah's peace and blessings be with all of them. So, sometimes we see a complex issue and we get overwhelmed. How are we going to prove God, Prophet, and 12 Imams? Well, really, the basic question is, does God exist? Should we, and even that question, does God exist, I don't like it, because God exists, and God's signs of his existence are everywhere. I can doubt my own self more than I can doubt God, because God is reality. God is truth. More than I know that I exist, I know that there is beauty and there is love and there is meaning within creation. And that's often how I understand my own self in the first place, through those universal and deeper truths. But if I believe in God, reasonably believe in God, then the next step is to ask and get an answer to the question, should I believe Prophet Muhammad or not? And if I believe Prophet Muhammad, then the question is, what did Prophet Muhammad say? Did he say to pray? Did he say to follow Imam Ali? And then I go step by step. So that complexity, it becomes something that sequentially I can approach and I can understand and I can get a reasonable answer. And of course, everybody goes through that study on their own. If it's sincere, then inshallah Allah will guide our steps.
That was very interesting to think about. The next question is, some feel that religion is not a choice that we make based on a cost-benefit analysis. If our mind accepts God as the creator, it must also accept that he has a plan for us.
That's very true. And that's one of the other takeaways I would like us to have, which is that, if we're talking to a person who is starting from a perspective of a cost-benefit analysis, then we can use some of the arguments that I made to show that the cost-benefit analysis is not that easy. Sometimes there's a 100-year war that's called a religious war, but it's not really a religious war. Underneath the religious part, there was also an ethnic component or something else. It's not the case that people who have a more similar religion or the same religion don't fight wars, right? As Europe or as America has become more secular, it's not like our defense budget and the number of people that have been killed by our weapons and wars throughout the world have gone down. So, for people who buy that cost-benefit analysis, some of the arguments that I tried to discuss can help us frame that in a more healthy manner. That the cost-benefit analysis is not that simple. Some things that you blame religion for, religion is not responsible. Some things that you blame religion for, non-religious human societies have committed the same mistakes or worse mistakes. So be a bit humble. But that's just in response to somebody who wants to do a cost-benefit analysis. The truth is that, yes, we should not approach our own religion, nor should we encourage that cost-benefit analysis. That's a valuable discussion on the side for us to be more humble, more realistic, and also to improve our religiosity, because sometimes we are religious in a harmful way. So it's a valuable discussion on the side. But the truth is that our mind should be thinking not about, if I become Muslim, what's in it for me? If I become Muslim and I fast, what's in it for me? Exactly how many palaces am I going to get in heaven? Exactly how many years is fasting going to add to my lifespan? Now, that's the wrong approach. The approach is, if it's right, if it's true, if my conscience and my heart have been convinced it's true, then I should follow it. That's the basis. And then everything else is secondary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that made a lot of sense. Thank you so much. The next question is, and the final question will be, if Islam is to guide us individually to fulfill our purpose of creation, then why do we focus so much at others and how they perceive us?
That's a good question. And one basic answer is that we focus too much on others. And that's something that that we have in a hadith, alaykum anfusakum, that that we should be concerned about our own selves and not always trying to correct other people, litigate other people, criticize other people. However, part of the individual guidance requires a healthy collective society. So, let's say, for example, not a religious example, an economic example. If you get an education, you become, a very accomplished engineer. If society doesn't have the infrastructure to allow you to put your knowledge to practice, to teach, to research, to invent, then your individual fulfillment and reaching your purpose is not going to benefit you or others as much as it should. So you need to have a system of government, a society, a way of public investment in infrastructure and education that allows you as an individual to reach your potential. So Islam does guide us as an individual, but part of how we can live as an individual in the best way is when our environment, our collective, our society is also healthy. And that's why we should be concerned about society. We should be concerned about encouraging what is good, discouraging what is evil, in order to allow our individual and our collective advancement. But having said that, it is true. Sometimes we focus too much on what people say and what people think, and we don't really focus on the state of our soul. And that's a mistake that people make. Religious people make it and non-religious people make it. And we as religious people should be on guard against that mistake.
I know I said that was the final question, but one more question just came in that I think is really important. Is it all right if I ask you that?
Sure.
So this question asks that the divisions based on religion and the resulting violence has only increased in current times. What can we Muslims do to promote peace and mutual respect?
Yeah, I think that, it's arguable. Has it increased? Has it decreased? Are the divisions based on religion or non-religion? And those are complex issues In general, I think not from a point of hard data, but from a point of our own experiences, we can say that sectarianism, religious chauvinism, and aggression is on the rise. But so is ethnic or racial chauvinism and bias. So maybe a healthy way to frame that question is to say that yes, divisions based on religion are increased, but divisions in general, polarization in general, Democrats and Republicans, pro-Biden and anti-Biden, pro-Trump and anti-Trump, they're more polarized as well, much more polarized than pro-Carter and pro-Reagan were 40 years ago, for example. So polarization as a whole has increased. Religion and non-religion, they're all affected by it. And therefore, we have to look at the causes of that. One of the causes, in my mind, is that religion has lost some of its spiritual and central character to our life. It's been boxed in. And when religion, which is meant to be that which gives meaning to my life and which makes me humble, when it's lost that essence and it's become boxed in to ritual, it's become boxed into material goals, my reputation, a form of therapy and other material goals, a social club for myself, for example, then it naturally loses those elements that give beauty and that give real benefit to religion. So the biggest thing I think that we as Muslims can do to promote peace and mutual respect is to recenter religion in our lives. And when we recenter religion, we want the religion of Prophet Muhammad, the religion of Lady Fatima, the religion of Imam Ali and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein and Lady Zainab. What was that religion? Beautiful slogan of the life of Lady Fatima, al-jar thumma ad-dar. Think of your neighbor, then think of yourself, right? So reclaim our religion. Put religion back at the center of our life, but not just religion as a label, not religion as, some people are proud that they're white and some people are proud that they're Italian and some people are proud that they're Hindu and some people are proud that they're Muslim. Not that kind of religion. Do away with that kind of religion. But the religion of, I want to serve God. I want to be good. I want to be pious. I want to be helpful. In the Quran, where Prophet Isa says that Allah ja'alani mubarakan, Allah made me blessed. Hadith say blessed means beneficial. Mubarak means nafa'. That's the kind of religion that we want. Wherever we go, we're a voice for good. We're a voice for the basic dignity and needs of human beings. If we do our religious well, then it's a polarized time. Politics, society, religious life are polarized, but we will be a voice for reducing that bad kind of polarization, and inshallah, a voice, as the question says, for peace and mutual respect and the betterment of society. So I don't think the solution is to run away from religion by saying religion is harmful, therefore less religion and we'll have more peace. I don't think that is the best solution. I think that the best solution is one where we recenter religion, but we refine and reform the way we approach religion.
Thank you for such an interesting and thought-provoking lecture, Sheikh Sulayman, and for answering all of our questions. And a big thank you to all of our other reciters, my sister Mariam, my uncle Ali Zaidi, and to Daniel Rizvi. And the Majlis will conclude with a ziyarat that will be recited by Ali Abbas uncle.
Ahsantum.
Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu alayka ya ibn Rasulillah. Assalamu alayka ya ibn Amir al-Mu'mineen wa ibn Sayyid al-Wasiyyin. Assalamu alayka ya ibn Fatimah al-Zahra بسيدة النساء العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك وعلى التسعة المعصومين من ذريتك. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا علي بن موسى الرضا الراضي بالقدر والقضاء يا سلطان العرب والعجم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والأمر والزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وجعلنا من أنصارك وأعوانك ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
السلام عليك يا حجة الله في أرضه. السلام عليك يا عين الله في خلقه. السلام عليك يا نور الله الذي يهتدي به المهتدون ويفرج به عن المؤمنين. السلام عليك أيها المهذب الخائف. السلام عليك أيها الغني الناصر. السلام عليك أيها المهذب الخائف. السلام عليك أيها الغني الناصر. السلام عليك يا سفينة النجاة. السلام عليك يا أين الحياة يا أين
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي علت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين.